Friends, today's NRI Samai program from Los Angeles brought to you commercial free by listeners like you. Your generous donations make possible for us to stay commercial free, and today's show is pre-recorded. If you have a question for the guest, please send an email to nrisamai@gmail.com. We will follow up with the guest and find the answer for you. Thank you for your support.
A very warm welcome to all our listeners on NRSMI. The thermal power plants in India today generate about 60% of the total power generation in India. And as of 2014, there are about 75 thermal power plants in the country. And I believe in addition to that, 60 new thermal power plants are in the pipeline. They're, I guess, delayed at the moment due to various reasons, which include land acquisition, the environment assessment, and also the concerns regarding the pollution. Thermal power plants are also a major reason for pollution, both air and water, impacting both humans and the plants. We have with us today on our show Shripad Dharmadhikary, who is a researcher, an activist, and working on privatization, the commodification of water, its analysis, the energy policies that are associated with that, and the entire nexus between the water and the environmental flows and the energy and so on and so forth. Shripad, thank you for being on our show and welcome to NRSMI.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share whatever information I have and my experience.
Thank you, Shripad. So starting off, is it true that there is a plan which is, I believe, has already been approved to introduce new power plants which are, I guess, of very higher capacity in Andhra Pradesh and various other states where there are huge coal mines?
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat that question because I didn't hear the question properly.
I was going to say, is it true that there is a proposal to introduce new thermal power plants of pretty large capacities in Andhra Pradesh and other areas where there is a vast coal mines?
Absolutely. I think if you look at the proposed plan, then India has proposals for massive expansion in coal-based power in the coming years. In fact, the numbers are quite amazing. We had done a quick review of the power plants, the coal-based power plants in pipeline some 3 years back, and there was more than 750,000 megawatts of coal and gas-based power plants in the pipeline, most of them coal-based power plants. To just put that in perspective, according to India's own planning commission, the kind of capacity that is likely to be required in the next 25 years, in that, they had planned for how much coal, how much hydro, how much solar, how much wind, and the proposed coal expansion is 3 times what that plan said we would need 25 years hence. So the numbers are just, mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this really, there is a big shortage of the power generation or the capacity in India, which is why we are ramping up and going all guns blazing and, trying to get all these mega capacity power plants? Is it really that situation?
See, certainly we need power. There is no doubt about that. We need electricity because there is still a huge unmet demand in the country. But the important point is whether all this proposed power is really being thought of to address that demand. And I think there is a big question mark there. If you look at the kind of people who still don't have access to electricity, there is almost 30% of India's population, but mostly in the rural areas, which doesn't have any electricity as such. And then there are many places where whatever supplies there is of poor quality. Then there are farmers and agriculturists who need the power to grow crops and ensure India's food security. But these are not the customers, or these are not the consumers that this expansion is targeting, because they are not nowhere in the priority. If they were, then already the existing power, some of it could have been used to supply to those people. What is likely is that this power would meet the needs of big industries and big consumers who are using energy intensive devices and who are having a high energy lifestyle. That is what it looks like. But even within that, I think there are serious questions in terms of even whether there is enough of that demand in this country. And the problem is that as a part of the sort of marketization of the economy, where over the last 25 years, reforms in the power sector have increasingly planned that power sector would be that the contours of the power sector would be increasingly determined by the market rather than by any planning. What has happened is that there is hardly any semblance of planning in terms of how much is the projected demand and, therefore how much capacity do we need. It is left to the so-called market forces. And therefore, you are seeing what we are seeing right now, that there is a huge rush to build all this large number of plants, many of whom may ultimately end up finding that there is no demand for their electricity.
Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then as you said, the Planning Commission has come up with a plan to say this much of electricity will be generated by the thermal power plants, this is by the renewable sources, and so on and so forth. Now, do you think, or based on whatever research you have done, that enough consideration has been given to the pollution and environmental concerns these thermal power plants seem to be having, not to mention the water pollution?
In fact, I would say that the minimal considerations have been given to all these factors, including displacement of people, including loss of livelihood of people, the impact on water, the impact on air, the kind of forest loss that is going to be there. Most of the time, environment was in news with respect to power plants and coal particularly was because it was being projected as an impediment or an obstacle. All the time it's said that all these power plants are being delayed and coal mines are being delayed because of lack of or delay in environmental clearances. So the environment is just sort of projected more as a villain than really any consideration being given to it. Even if you look at the capacity planning which was done, whatever little semblance of capacity planning which was done, environment was just mentioned as an afterthought. So really speaking, it's not considered anywhere at all. To give you a more sort of concrete example, or a smaller sort of part of this larger picture, lot of this proposed coal capacity is going to come up in clusters. You have several areas in the country where you have a high concentration of thermal power plants being proposed. For example, there is the districts of Janjgir, Champa and Raigad in Chhattisgarh, where close to 50,000 or even more megawatts of capacity is being planned. You have areas in Odisha, you have Vidarbha region in Maharashtra. These are, of course, all coal mining areas, and there is a lot of capacity proposed to be set up around this coal mine. Now, when you are doing that, then really you need to do a area or a regional carrying capacity study, that in an area, in a small region, say 2 or 3 districts, you are going to have several, say 20, 30 big coal mines and some 10, 15 coal-fired power plants. Then, can that environment sustain? Does the regional environment have that carrying capacity to carry that much environmental load? Mm-hmm. But nothing of this sort has been done. Even the environment impact assessments which are being done, which are legally mandatory, they are only being done for individual plants, So, and it completely ignores the issue of the cumulative impacts of so many power plants and so many mines coming up together in one area. So these are, just some things which are so obvious to anybody who is bearing the brunt these problems. But our policymakers seem completely oblivious to that. And of course, the reason for that is very clear. These are seen as obstacles. It's thought that if you do a cumulative impact assessment study, then it's likely to show that the cumulative impact of so many plants is probably much greater than the sum of their parts. And that's not a message that people want to hear.
Now, are these environmental assessment reports, is the government obligated to make this information public?
Yes, these reports are in the public domain. Undoubtedly, that's the case. But there are many problems there. One of the biggest problems is that most of these reports are in English, where a language which most of the local affected people do not understand. In law, after the environment impact assessment is done, then it is supposed to be made public, and then a public hearing is held based on that impact assessment study. And 30 days are given or something like that for people to read that report. Now, it's really ridiculous to expect somebody to read a report of that size and that complexity in 30 days. And that's also in the language which is alien to them. They're supposed to also have that in the local language, but what most people do is they only present an executive summary in the local language. And even sometimes that is not presented. So it's really almost like a farce.
Right. It's interesting to note that, while you say that these practical problems exist with the way the policymakers carry out and implement these sort of rules and regulations, something interesting happened. On May 2015, the government came out with a draft notification on the emission standards for, these coal-based thermal power plants, which has for the first time introduced standards for the emissions for sulfur dioxide or not nitrogen dioxide and even mercury for that matter. So do you see any hope that these standards were never set before, now that there is at least an effort to introduce such emission standards, which are retroactively even, I believe, to a certain extent are applicable for the old power generation plants and certainly are applicable for the newer ones that are going to come into 2017. What's your take on this?
To be a bit more accurate, I think it's not fully accurate to say that the standards are coming in for the first time. There are standards for some of the emissions for particulate matter, for example, but there were no standards for sulfur dioxide, or there were no standards for mercury, certainly. So some of the standards are new. There were no standards or no norms for how much water the power plant could consume. For the first time now, those standards are being proposed. So certainly it's a welcome step. But actually it's a very, very half-hearted attempt is what I would say. And also it's quite ad hoc because they have not made clear as to what is the logic and the rationale for these standards, for these numbers. If you look at some of these numbers, they are very much more lenient or much more sort of far more liberal towards the pollution that is being allowed as compared to some of the other countries that have similar power plants. So what is the reason for choosing these more liberal standards? That's not very clear. How the standards will be operationalized, it's still not very clear. So, and then why standards are being chosen for some and not for others? Because there are still several parts of the pollutants which are not being notified as a part of the standard. So all these things are not clear in that. So we think that these are really half-hearted attempts, and I don't want to sort of discount any genuine concerns that the government may have. I don't want to necessarily say that they don't have any concern for the citizens. Surely some of this must have been prompted by the feeling that there is pollution that is taking place and we must do something. But I think a lot of it is essentially also coming from the fact that, okay, we need to do something, but really we shouldn't do anything that will put too much of the burden on the power plants, and we shouldn't do something set standards that will make really things difficult for them. I think there is also this dominating, I would say, concern which we can see through the standards. And I say this is a dominating concern in the entire environmental regime in this country, that they do want to show that they are doing something, but without touching any of the fundamentals. And that same approach can be seen in these standards, that you are trying to do some, little bit of, trying to show that, okay, you are trying to take some measures, but you are not really doing anything at the fundamental level.
Friends, NRI Samay is a non-profit independent alternate media from Los Angeles, USA, which brings positive stories from grassroots activists from all corners of India and across the world. NRI Samay does not rely on corporate funding, and our shows are commercial free. We only rely on your donations. Corporate funded media is driven by the TRP rating, and profits are blurring the distinction between news and entertainment. Why do our news channels talk so much about cricket, movies, accidents, popular figures' personal lives, babies of heroines, gossips, etc., while they should be covering the struggles of people, inequality in our society, rural issues, and border security issues? Why did our media raise some corruption crusaders to the sky on one day and shut them off completely when graft charges were raised on those corporate sponsors? Media relies so much on the corporate funding and government blessings that they cannot report independently. NRI Samay is different. We don't accept funds from any corporations, and hence our shows are commercial free. We completely rely on donations from you. Please consider donating to NRI Samay, and please go to nrisamay.com and donate generously. This is the only way together that we can continue NRI Samay. All donations are kept transparent on nrisamay.com. And if you have any questions, please write to nrisamay@gmail.com.
Okay. Regarding the pollution that you just mentioned, now the water pollution where we believe something called as the total suspended solids are found in the water, which if found in large quantities can really be detrimental. Now, how do you even go about sort of testing what is the extent to which the groundwater pollution is happening? Like, how can this pollution be tangible or measured tangibly, such that these can be highlighted to the government? What have you found in your research?
See, the thing is that, of course, there are ways to measure the pollution. The pollutants from the pollutant streams from coal-fired power plants and the coal mines are quite well known, and at least some of the major pollutants are well known, and there are ways to measure them. The problem is to have a credible and a really independent and a credible mechanism to do this monitoring. Today, if you see the mechanisms which are existing, there are broadly two mechanisms. One is the power plants and the coal mines themselves are supposed to monitor the effluent streams and the emission streams from their projects. And the second is the pollution control boards are supposed to be sort of the regulatory agencies, and they are supposed to also do their own independent monitoring. And though these are really the data and the figures from there completely, there's a total lack of credibility with these figures because nobody really believes these figures. And the thing is, it's so obvious. If you actually read, for example, just last week I was in the Korba region in Chhattisgarh state, and Korba is one of those hotbeds of coal mining and thermal power plants. And if you look at the most of the figures from whatever publicly available monitoring stations, it seems everything is fine. The water is, all the pollutants in the water are within limits. All the air pollutants are within limits. But actually, if you go there, the air is so thick with dust and with pollution matters, and water. If you just look at the water, you can actually see the ash flowing in the water. You can see the ash particles being deposited all around the riverbeds and on the banks of the small streams, because these are being discharged with total impunity. And during the windy days, ash and dust, coal ash, which is a output, which is the residue from after the coal is being burned, which is deposited all around the city and all around the region. On windy days, the coal ash is flying all around the place. Now, this is so obvious, and it is in such a stark contrast to the figures which one sees in the monitoring figures, you see. So the monitoring is possible. So what we have been suggesting is, first of all, whatever monitoring is there, that should be completely done in a completely transparent manner. All the locations of the monitoring stations, what kind of monitoring is being done there, by whom, all those data should be in the public domain. The monitoring should be on a continuous basis, not on sampling which is done at some regular intervals. The monitoring should be on a continuous basis, and the data should be streamed online, real time, so that people can actually see, and the agencies which are doing the monitoring can be held accountable. And there should be much more credible ways of doing it. The people from the affected areas must be part of in some way of the regulatory bodies. The pollution control boards today really don't have anybody from the people who are really affected by the pollutants. So you need to have some mechanism where the local communities will also be a part of the monitoring or the regulating mechanism. So there are several ways of doing it, but there is no credibility in the entire monitoring mechanism.
So how do you bring credibility? Like, how do you make the government officials accountable, given that the ground reality is saying something, but the numbers that they are projecting are saying a completely different story? So in your experience, or in your the activism, the kind of activism that you are doing on the ground, is it even possible that this kind of engagement with the government officials could be done and they can be held responsible? Has it happened in all these years of your in your experience?
Of course, it has happened in several places, and wherever it has happened, it has been essentially due to citizens' actions. And barring one or two occasional very good officials who have come out and tried to take a stand. But I think it has essentially been a result of citizens' action, and I think what we need to really do is to create conditions where citizens' actions can be facilitated, enabled on one side, and on the other side, we must also keep building more and more accountability mechanisms within the formal structure. And to do this, transparency is one absolutely critical thing, where, as I mentioned, one of the things is every pollution, the location, and who is monitoring, and, who is in charge of that monitoring station, the location of that station, the data from that station. This should be available publicly. The appointments on the pollution control boards and their agencies should include people from the affected area, so that they have more at stake in terms of controlling and the pollution. There should be regular audits of some of these things, by independent agencies, so that you can do cross-checking in terms of whether some of the data which was measured was correct or not. At the same time, I think there is also a need to build much more capacity and awareness in civil society and in people's movements and organizations, because it's a little more technical issue in terms of monitoring pollution and monitoring what's happening. So I think that is also an important thing which needs to be done to empower people. I think there has to be also some exemplary action on officials who have defaulted on their duty. Right now, that is one critical thing which is missing.
Do you think I've been reading some of the CAG reports that came out on the performance of these thermal power plants, the kind of pollution violations that these thermal plants have been doing over these years. Do you think these CAG reports are taken seriously? Because they are clearly highlighting, for example, I'm actually looking at a report right now which highlights the from 2000 to 2005, what is the TSS levels, and it clearly says that the permissible limit is 100 milligrams per liter, but they have seen to the extent of 800 to 970 and so on and so forth. And it's clearly stated in the CAG report. So it's not that it's not being the evidence, there is no lack of evidence, but like how do we, like the point that you said earlier, how do we bring this kind of, accountability? And you said it has happened in a few occasions. Could you actually give an example where this actually happened and the civil society forced the authorities to sort of mend their ways and make it more transparent?
Yes. So I think one of the things which is also part of the reality of this landscape is that most of the power plants, there are huge and very powerful vested interests behind power plants. A lot of them, of course, are in the public sector, but there are a lot of them are also privately owned, and they are owned by very powerful, mostly political players who have, very strong influence at the state level and at the central level. And, that really makes them completely sort of get away with anything and everything that they do. And it's very, very important to break this sort of nexus. And this is, of course, not something that is limited to just the, power plants and the coal mines and the other such projects, but it's a part of a deeper problem with the entire politics of this country, where the law is really non-existent for the powerful, and the powerful are, there is a complete nexus between the political, economic, and bureaucratic power structures, and so those who are members of this powerful elite can get away with anything and everything. They are immune to all kinds of persecutions, and I think it's a part of that deeper problem. And so, of course, the solutions are both short-term, medium-term, and long-term, where the long-term solution is that we need to change the whole entire political economy of this country. And I think we have seen some positive things happening in the last few years. It's not as if, there is a complete bleak picture, but the balance is overwhelmingly still towards the fact that people are getting away with things which they should never, be doing.
Mm-hmm. And, just for the sake of our listeners, what is the kind of work that you and your team are engaged with? Like, what kind of research and activism do you actually do? Like, for example, you said you went to Korba in Chhattisgarh. What was the purpose of that visit?
So what we are trying to do is basically we are trying to do some analytical work around water and environment and development, the sort of linkage of water, environment, and development, and then use this analytical work to also do some policy advocacy, use this to build discourse, create, a debate around these issues, use this work to also strengthen the hands of people who are fighting on the ground. That's a broad sort of mandate of our work. More specifically, right now we are engaged in looking at how the entire coal chain, right from coal mining, coal washing, coal transport, and coal burning and waste disposal, how this entire chain is impacting water, in many different ways, and then trying to understand what are the ways in which the legal and regulatory Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So trying to look at the ways in which the legal and regulatory regime is, how this is being controlled and regulated, where are the gaps, and how this can be strengthened, how people's actions can be strengthened, how you can bring much more accountability and transparency into it. So, for example, one of the things that we are trying to do is trying to look at how much water is being consumed by these power plants. And Then we try to look at how these water allocations are being made, and then during the times of water shortage, what is being privileged? Are the power plants being privileged? Are the local people's needs being privileged? How the water allocation and distribution of water resources is happening? That's one of the things we are doing. The other thing we are trying to understand is we are actually trying to unravel this impact of pollution and particularly water pollution that is coming from coal mines and coal power plants.
Mm-hmm.
And we are trying to understand the weaknesses, how the system is getting away with polluting so much, so brazenly polluting, because every river, every stream you see, you can see the pollution. You don't even have to measure it. You can see the pollution. And at the same time, they are getting away with it in a completely brazen manner. So we are trying to work to bring out the weaknesses in this system, and then also suggest solutions which can strengthen accountability, which can actually make sure that it's not so easy for people to get away with these kind of things. So these are the kind of things that we are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, is there a website or any other place where all this information is accessible, like the kind of work you do and the analytical reports and research?
Yes, so we have a website of our organization, Manthan Adyayan Kendra. So the website is manthan-india.org. We have this website where we are putting whatever we are bringing out in terms of articles, blog posts, reports, all those things we are putting up, any presentations. So we have a website, and then of course we also have much broader. We are trying sort of also reach out through other means. Particularly, what we are trying to do is also link up with people on the ground and learn from them. At the same time, share our insights with them so that their struggles are strengthened. We are trying to use more popular and mainstream media to create discourse. We are trying to also push government into action, by writing to the government, giving them suggestions, trying to hold them accountable. So these are the kind of things we are trying to do. And yes, whatever information that we generate, whatever efforts we are taking are available on our website.
Great. Shripad, let me ask you a somewhat personal question. Now, as I was trying to learn more about you and your work, I learned that you are an IIT graduate from Mumbai, and then you...
That's right. Yeah.
You also worked for a couple of years, I believe, and after that you joined the Narmada Bachao Andolan. So what is it that led you to quit whatever you were doing, the mainstream job, if you will, and join the movement?
Yeah, well, I think it's only looking back now I can see what led me to go along this path. But yeah, I did complete my BTech from IIT Bombay, and then I was working with a group of small-scale industries. And at that time, I wanted to set up my own industry and make a big career and make big money and whatever aspirations normally people have. I also had that. But somewhere along the way, actually, I was quite perturbed and quite disturbed by the kind of pollution that was taking place and the kind of, the destruction of environment that was taking place. And keep in mind that this was 30 years back, so at that time it was much smaller than what is happening now. But even at that time, I think the impacts were were quite significant. And I really started feeling very much troubled by that, and I thought that I must do something about it. And being an engineer and being more academically minded, I thought maybe I should do a PhD in environmental engineering and try to help address environmental problems in that manner. And I did try to do that, and I secured my admissions for some of the PhD courses. But during that time, I came into touch with some of the movements and happenings on the ground. And that's when I realized that the destruction of environment is not so much a technical issue. It is. We need technology to counter that, and we need technology to address that. But it's much more of a political issue. People are destroying the environment because they can get away with it with complete impunity. There are no checks and balances, and that is happening because they are politically powerful, they are economically powerful. So you always saw very, when I started looking, I saw a very similar picture across a variety of environmental destruction that was happening. And that is, the people who were destroying the environment were the rich and the politically powerful, and they were benefiting a lot from it by, making a lot of money and getting a lot of other things out of it. And those at the receiving end were always the poor, the Dalits, the tribals. And somewhere I think this sort of exploration led me to think that it's really the political balance of power, the checks and balances, which are the critical defining factor. Once they are in place, then I think technology is important. Then I think our approach to, how we handle these problems is important. But that is the core issue. And the second thing I realize is that when we talk about environment, then it's not separate from, it's really what is happening to the environment is really a function of the choices we are making in terms of development. How do we want to use our rivers? How do we want to use our forests? How much water do we want to extract from our river? For what purposes? And these are the developmental choices that we are making, and they are directly responsible for whether we destroy the environment or we preserve it, whether we ensure equity or whether we ensure inequity. So, once I looked at all this, and this was, a process of several years it happened, then I thought that the kind of work I wanted to do was, much more on the ground and with, where one could actually challenge some of these things. And that's the time when the Narmada Bachao Andolan, this is the fight against the dams on the Narmada River, was still in its very, very early stages. And I came across this movement, and I was very much impressed by both the strength on the ground and the way it was, a fight on the ground, as well as the kind of whole view of looking at the dam not just as one dam, but as a symbol of what is wrong with the entire development paradigm. So then I sort of decided that this is probably a place where I can be effective, and I decided to join the Narmada struggle, where I was there for about 12 years after that. And then, after that I wanted to come back to doing more analytical work, which has been my first sort of love always. And I think also it is very, very critical, particularly in today's age where the technological interventions, even the political interventions, the way the financial systems are intervening in our lives has become far more complex, and therefore it needs much more analytical effort for even movements and struggles to succeed. And so then I think after 12 or 13 years in the Narmada struggle, I decided wanted to do some more analytical work, and that's how Manthan was set up, and that's where we are right now.
Great. I mean, I only hope you achieve success as well along your journey, small, big, whatever success you may get, and wish you all the very best in the coming year, 2016. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, views, and your experiences on our show.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share whatever my experiences are. And about success, I think, yes, thanks for your wishes on that. And I think we've had our fair share of successes. But about success, I really want to emphasize one thing. There's this popular song which says, "I'll get by with a little help from friends." And I think in these issues, I think it's really a collective effort. And I think whatever success we've had is because we've been able to work as a part of a much larger collective. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. And there you go, friends. If you want to follow Shripad and his team's work, please go to manthan-india.org and follow their activities. And thank you once again, Shripad.
Thank you.
Friends, if you liked today's show, please go to youtube.com/NRI Samay and click on the subscribe button. You will get notified every time we publish a new show. And you can also like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.